All right, let's move on to part two. Part two has a little more detail for those who want to know the basis on which I made my prediction to the class that California and the nation should start going down soon. And it comes back to a time when a person that I really admired tweeted out something that I thought was too pessimistic. Now, I didn't know that at the time, but I kept it because I wanted to remind myself that even this person that I admired the most said something that turned out to be wrong in a too pessimistic way. This is the thread, and it's from Ed Yong. Now, I really admire Ed Yong. I want to put that in the title because I had signed 3 of his pieces he should win all the awards this year. And I assigned 3 of his pieces to my students and things like that. But I do want to say that even Ed Yong can tweet things that turn out to be wrong. There was a reasoning in this thread that came out November 20th, and it raised a red flag for me because I don't think the reasoning was sound. Basically, he took the 12-day lag between rising cases and rising hospitalizations, and he assumed because cases had been rising steadily in the Great Plains states, particularly in Nebraska, he made a specific numerical prediction. Even if no one else is infected, and of course other people were infected, that surge will slam into already stretched hospitals over Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving, of course, this year was in the late November 20s. And so this was about a week before Thanksgiving, a little less, and he made that prediction. And so I said, I don't know if I agree, so I'm going to keep that tweet. I screenshotted it, and then I watched what happened with my favorite metric, current hospitalizations. There is when that tweet was made on 11/20. It had every reason to say the hospitals are stressed out, they're full. Per capita, Nebraska hospitals were about half as full as the real danger point, maybe half as full as they are in California right now. I'll have to check that. The main thing is they were at the peak when he posted that, and he said that there will be a wave slamming into them over Thanksgiving. Well, in Thanksgiving they dropped, and they continue to drop all the way to the present day. See what I mean by these bell-shaped curves seeming to happen with some little blips, but if you look at it, the 7-day average, it tends to show up like that. And so you see there's no evidence of a wave slamming into the hospitals over Thanksgiving from that. So that means that you can't reason from the 12-day lag. All those cases are not converted into hospitalizations at the same rate after 12 days. It was not baked into the data, and it did not happen. There's other people that I admire a whole lot. There's a tweet from Trevor Bedford that was a little pessimistic. It wasn't as pessimistic as this one was, and there's some argument that he was ultimately kind of in the right direction. All that's to say, if you tweet enough, you're going to get something wrong. But I've gotten some stuff wrong on these as well. It's not a huge thing. The important thing is to say, let's take all tweets and hold them lightly, especially when we have a dynamic and changing situation. So this is what I noticed then, and that's why I took it to the talk a week ago. A week ago, I showed this, and I said, I noticed that at this same point, Yu Yangu's Nowcast said there were about 23 to 25% of the state had been infected. I noticed that the peak height also had a relationship to the total population of the state. Oh yeah, and so that is the same sort of ratio that we see in California right now. That's part of my whole point in making the slide. Thank you, slide, for reminding me. There's a 1 to 2,000 ratio of people in the hospitals at the peak to the total population of the state. Those 3 things go together: population, peak height, and percent infected. So I noticed that the summer peaks tended to turn around when you had about 1 out of 2,000 people that were hospitalized. Now this is different from total infected, so this played out a little bit different over the summer. But this corresponded to the C19 Pro estimates that about 15 to 20% of the population had been infected in the South. I think that this number was different, the percentage was different over the summer because the transmissibility of the virus was lesser because of seasonality. So when the same pattern happened, though, with the hospitalized, hospitals were just as full of COVID patients per capita when the peak turned around. That's why I made my prediction and my last Great Plains state thing that I said. And that's why I noticed California was at the same point a week ago. And that's why I went out on a limb. I noticed the Yu said 20% infected, so they should be getting close to 25%. By the way, Gu only predicts up to the last 2 weeks. He calls it a nowcast, but it's actually a fortnight past cast, because he only predicts the now that was true 2 weeks ago. He's very careful, and it's been borne out that his conclusions have been robust overall. So you have the peak height, that's a ratio of a little bit above the one that was in Nebraska, but about the same level. So I put these together 1 week ago, and I said I think California will go down. Here's what happened, and I go back and forth. California went down. And when they hit 22% infected, they started to go down, and the peak height was about the same as it was when I noticed it. So I noticed that about Florida. And again, Florida has seasonality effects going on. But I was wondering, I was noticing that the hospitals were almost as full now as they were back then. And I know that they were pretty full back in the summer. But they were still below level. You see the blue line is below right now where it was in the summer, in August, July. But I also noticed Florida right now, according to GU, is 22.4%. So I said maybe Florida will turn around. This is what happened. Florida has flattened out, and it certainly is flatter than it has been for months, and I think this is the beginning of it turning around. I think that we've seen the same pattern here. So California, Florida, I started to look for a counterexample. The one I could find was Arizona. Arizona was the one that looked like Florida for the summer peak, but its winter peak was worse. So something different's going on. I expect a little bit of heterogeneity between states, but I was also noticing Arizona was kept going up, and it was at 28%. Okay, that's not too drastically different from 25%, but it still had me worried, and this is the worst counterexample that I could find. Well, I have to take back the is worse now, because it's now going down again. It did end up with a higher peak than before. It's got a 1.3 to 2,000 ratio rather than a 1.1 or 1.0 to 2,000 ratio. But again, with so many variables, this actually looks like what I hoped would happen. I hoped that it would start to turn around, and we've seen that happen for Arizona as well. So Arizona is the one where you have more cases than I expected, more hospitalizations later than I expected. That did turn around. But the other end of the counterexample is Washington. Washington, according to GU, only has 10% infected. But like I said in the last video, hospitalizations are dropping and have been dropping since mid-December. The one thing I want to say is GU depends on the testing, and he assumes, his numbers are calibrated to the testing being... He has it changing over time, but he doesn't really know, no one knows, what the testing was like, how many it captured, or how many it missed, more likely, at the beginning of this epidemic. If, because we were the first in the country to get this, to show community transmission at the very least, maybe there's more that we missed early on. I'm hoping that's true, because if it's not true, that means that we actually have a more vulnerable population because we've locked ourselves down well enough to keep away from this 25% threshold. The other thing about this is if the 25% threshold is real, it should work for many big counties as well. I expect it will work for King County, and the one thing I've noticed is that King County has fared better than the rest of Washington State, which has fared better than the rest of the country with this winter wave as it's hit basically the whole country. It's interesting to take that apart. I'm going to be happy for now with declining hospitalizations, and I'm just going to use this as an example why we should all get vaccinated more often, because if we've been good enough socially at the non-pharmaceutical interventions at holding this back, then we've got to also be good at the pharmaceutical interventions now that the vaccines are available. But this leads to one final question. What if there is a biological game changer? Yu Gu's model will not be able to anticipate that. So the question is, what about the new variants? And that will be part 3 that I'll deal with next.